You've probably heard of mom brain or pregnancy brain. So we have some new information about what happens in the brain during pregnancy and postpartum. We want to talk about it. I'm Dr. Nichelle Haynes.
I'm Dr. Kristen Lassiter.
And this channel is Medical Mamas. We give you the real deal information about your reproductive mental health.
Meaning mental health in relation to reproductive hormone changes like pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, premenstrual disorders, and infertility.
Based in science. Today we're going to talk about the newest study that we have. It came out in September 2024. So if you're watching this at a different time, it's still new to us.
Yeah.
We're really excited about it. So the study was in Nature Neuroscience from Prashett et al. They researched 3 weeks prior to conception up until 2 years postpartum. And what they did was they had one woman and gave her serial or repeated MRIs. I think she had 26 or so MRIs throughout that period of time, which is a lot of MRIs. If you ever had one, that's a lot.
It's a lot of sitting laying still. I think it's important to note that, so this was just one person that they looked at. So we can't say this is broadly what happens to everyone yet. And also her pregnancy was done via IVF. So we don't really know if that has differences in terms of changes in the brain either.
Right. So they studied the actual physical changes in the brain, and then they also did studies on her hormone levels, so estrogen and progesterone. Okay, you're really gonna have to stick with us here. I know it sounds like sometimes really science-y, right? But that's why you're here. We want to give you some basic information about different types of cells in the brain. Different types of areas in the brain, I guess.
Because this study is really looking a lot at gray matter changes versus white matter changes in the brain. And that can be confusing. What the heck does that mean? Mm-hmm. So we wanted to kind of talk about the brain in general and what is gray matter versus white matter real quick before we kind of dive into the results of the study.
Mm-hmm. So the gray matter is going to be the cortex, right? We'll call it the cortex sometimes. So it's mostly gray matter there. And that is mostly involved in your cognitive functions, like your memory, your decision making, your emotions, processing information.
Yeah, gray matter is where the actual brain cells are, the body of the cells. Mm-hmm. And then white matter is actually the cell's axons. So if you have ever seen a cell, a brain cell, we have these long axons, and that's what connects them to each other. So then these different bodies of cells can actually talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And so the white matter is these myelinated axons.
Right. And basically what they do is they facilitate communication from one part of the brain to the next part of the brain. So if you have the cell here, and that's the part that is gray, right? And it processes information, it has to send it somewhere. So it will send it on, in the white matter tracks to another area of the brain. So that's why the white matter is important to send the information.
Yeah. And then inside your brain, you also have ventricles, and it's basically pockets of fluid, which we call cerebral spinal fluid. It's a specific type of fluid that's inside and around your brain. Mm-hmm. And that's important just to kind of mention for the study. Mm-hmm. So this study is really interesting in that it's looking at the brain changes across pregnancy. And what we find, well, I should say this is interesting because we haven't had a study like this before. So we've had a study where it's looked at, pre-pregnancy and then postpartum, and then what are the differences, or during pregnancy and postpartum, what are the differences? But we haven't had a study that's looking throughout pregnancy. So checking, whatever, every so weeks, looking at how is the brain changing and how are these changes correlated to estrogen and progesterone levels changing. Mm-hmm. So that's what's so cool about this study.
And every cool study brings about more questions than it answers, right? So we answered the question of what does this person's brain do during pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, and postpartum? Now can we replicate that and show that everyone's brains kind of do similar things, or whose people's brains do this and whose people's brains do that? And then also, what does that correlate with as far as how people are feeling? Maybe miscarriage rates or, anything, right? So
Or like how does this correlate with mental illness? Does that look different? And people who are suffering with mental illness, do their brain changes differ? And will that somehow help us with treatment later on down the road?
Right. Okay, so let's get to it.
Yeah.
So there were broad neuroanatomical changes. The brain definitely looks different pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, and postpartum. And the ways that happens is the gray matter and the total brain volume decrease during pregnancy, and they only postpartum come back to like not pre-pregnancy levels.
Up to 2 years.
Right. That's we know.
So like from before the pregnancy, throughout the pregnancy, their gray matter volume in this one individual was decreasing. And I think it decreased up to like 3 times what it is if you look at the same time period across like a control individual. So somebody who's not pregnant and who's also healthy. And then postpartum, we see that it kind of comes back a little bit, but not really.
Not to where it was pre-pregnancy.
Yeah, at least up to 2 years. And what that means,
we don't really know.
we don't know.
So we know gray matter, if, like we said before, involved in memory, emotions, and decision making. So is this like pruning away things that aren't quite helpful for us anymore and developing connections that are helpful for us now as moms? Or is this does this mean that, mom brain or pregnancy brain is real and it's correlated with brain changes? Or, there's lots of different questions that we have from a great study.
Yeah, because it also wasn't that all the parts of the brain are changing in the same way. So like some parts where the volume was decreasing and then other areas of gray matter brain weren't decreasing as much. So it's very interesting.
Right.
And then the white matter.
Oh, wait. Okay. Before we go away from the gray matter, the gray matter changes were correlated or kind of like way in the same direction as estradiol and pregnancy, or estradiol and progesterone during pregnancy.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see that.
Yeah, like the amount of change that happened with estrogen and progesterone correlated with the amount of change that we saw in the gray matter volume across the pregnancy. So we're evidence that estrogen and progesterone have a huge role in the brain.
Right. Yes. But we still don't understand.
But we don't know how that all happens. We don't know yet. So if people are, like the people who are trying to sell you hormones and stuff like that,
I don't know.
They don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know
We don't know what they're doing. Anyway. Okay. So let's talk about white matter changes, because those are the connector pieces of the cells, right? So we had the integrity or the microstructure of the white matter increased through the first part of the pregnancy, the first and second trimesters, and then went back to its regular level at postpartum. So what does that mean? We don't really know.
We don't know, but it was a significant change where that connectivity and that white matter was changing rapidly in that first and second trimester.
And then we talked about the ventricles, which are pockets of cerebrospinal fluid in your brain, and we noticed that there were expansions of the lateral ventricles in the second and the third trimester, as well as increased cerebrospinal fluid volume that went back to normal in the postpartum period. I mean, is that related to headaches related to pregnancy, or migraines related to pregnancy, or is that related to something else completely different, right? We know that there are other mental illnesses that are associated with changes in the ventricles. So does that have some correlation? Like, we just have there's just so many interesting questions that come from a really great study like this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of changes that happen in a person's brain when they are pregnant. As clinicians who see people who are pregnant all the time, we definitely know that the brain is different. We just don't understand exactly how and how that relates to symptoms or successes with pregnancy or any of those things. So it's really interesting to have this new information. It's just, what are we gonna do next, and how is that gonna move forward studying women's brain?
And I feel like this is so validating. I mean, I know, again, this is just one person, so I would love to see what happens in other people's brains, but it's also so validating because if you've been pregnant before, like, it just feels like your brain, afterwards, you're also just like, Can't remember things
Yeah.
like I used to. I'm just like, there's just too much going on. The fogginess, also, bringing on motherhood, just all that.
Just the general stress of it, right?
Yeah.
They didn't test like her symptoms. They didn't test like how she was feeling or doing, and it would be really interesting to see if those things are correlated in a lot of people. So
Yeah.
really exciting. Let us know what questions you have about this. We're happy to answer those questions. Please like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you soon.
Bye.